Testing, testing. Okay, good.
Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and get started. This room is going to be multi-purpose after this for the finals, so we want to get started so we can be on time because Dr. Harris has a lot of wonderful stuff to share today. I'm here to introduce Dr. Harris, Dr. Phillip Harris. I'm reading. He's like, you know me. You could just wing it. I'm like, no, I gotta read. Otherwise, I might. It's at the end of the weekend. I might say something silly. So Dr. Harris has sung the music of Black composers at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. He has sung with the SF Symphony, SF Opera Chorus, Aspen Musical Festival, Reno Chamber Orchestra, Mountain Play, San Mateo Masterworks Chorale and Orchestra, Opera Las Vegas, and more. He wrote a book on Jacqueline Hairston, Songs and Spirituals, the life and music of Jacqueline Hairston, and has 2 recordings of vocal music. Phillip Harris in Recital with Damian Sneed and in an original EP in My Fills. And I've actually heard his music, and it's so cool, so you have to check it out. He teaches at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music as a voice teacher in the pre-college division and as a music history instructor for undergraduates and graduate students, where he created the first ever class at SFCM on Black American art songs. He just taught a hip-hop course at West Valley College and is the vocal director of the high school at Menlo School. Dr. Harris holds degrees from University of California, Irvine, University of Michigan, and University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He serves the SFBAC NATS, the San Francisco Bay Area Chapter NATS, as co-VP of student auditions. I just want to say he's incredible. I used to live in the Bay Area. I just moved here down to SoCal 3 months ago. So, when I left SF San Francisco Bay Area chapter before I became region governor. So I was very active and worked with Dr. Harris, and he's just so full of, he's so giving, and he's so full of energy. And I actually have a student that has worked with him at the Menlo School in the musical theater department, and everyone just adores him. He's just great. So you're going to have a treat ahead of you today. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Phillip Harris.
Thank you, Katie. It's always good to have friends that can say something nice about you. So I appreciate that warm introduction. I am indeed the grandson of a preacher, a Kojic preacher. So if you feel like talking back or saying things, I definitely encourage that. Amen. And it is Sunday. So greetings to everyone here, and thank you for allowing me to stand before you for just a little while on this momentous weekend as we not only celebrate the work that we do for singers and those who teach singing, but as we also commemorate a man who, in his words, tried to do his duty as a Christian ought. He tried to bring salvation to a world once wrought. He tried to spread the message as the Master taught. It was his hope that his living was not in vain. I'm here amongst friends and colleagues, and as we attempt to honor the legacy and the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in his 39 years of life was quite a complex figure. He was the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize during the time it was awarded to him, and he was also arrested dozens of times. He was the youngest pastor appointed to Ebenezer Baptist Church, and had his phone constantly wiretapped by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. He was a champion for civil rights and advancing the struggle for all people, yet he had multiple assassination attempts, including by a black woman during a book signing. He also led one of the most successful economic boycotts in human history and had bombs thrown into his home at the same time. These polar opposite realities of Dr. King are striking to me, it reminds me that when you are truly doing the work, there is often a target on your back. And on this day, January 15th, 2023, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been 94 years old. So I won't stand here and attempt to tell you that we should live a life like his, but I will tell you to live your life in the best way that you can. As I prepared for this moment at this time, I thought of the work that we do in our organization with NATS. And I asked myself, as Dr. King once posed this question to us, one of life's most persistent questions is, what are you doing for others? I hope that our service of bringing people together from different backgrounds to promote, uplift, and encourage diverse fields of art might serve as a mere glimmer of hope for our future. I must say I was very thoroughly encouraged by what I saw on Friday night with the wonderful diverse background, the wonderful diverse repertoire that was presented on stage here a couple of nights ago, and it is my sincere hope that more of that will infiltrate its way into the wider NATS community. It is my plan to perhaps share a little bit of information I've gathered on researching, performing, and teaching Black American art song, but before I do that, I'd like to begin with the idea of the Season of Remembrance, a song title of a Jacqueline Hairston piece. This season of remembrance that we are in right now is designated for a man who exactly a year to the date before he was taken from us offered a stirring sermon as he spoke out against the war in Vietnam at the historic Riverside Baptist Church in New York. In that speech, he uttered the words that the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today was his own government. He also said that he spoke out against the war in Vietnam because he loved America. And he said that there can be no great disappointment where there is no great love. This is the same man who in the last 11 months of his life offered a speech entitled The Three Evils of Society: Racism, Poverty, and War. The man who once stood over the shoulder of President Johnson as poignant laws were being signed into place in the last year of his life, he was being labeled a traitor and was denounced by leaders who once supported him. Some of the black middle class didn't want to have anything to do with him. And the rise of black nationalism tried to ostracize him from his own community. Dr. King said himself, it's much easier to integrate lunch counters and buses in schools than it is to close the racial wealth gap. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King championed diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice long before any organization thought to put it at the forefront. As we think about Dr. King, I'd like to draw your attention to a very famous Langston Hughes poem. This is one we're all familiar with, I Dream a World. Langston Hughes, arguably one of the most influential, not only writers of the 20th century, but perhaps one of the most influential individuals when you consider the impact he has had on American culture. You see, it's people like Hughes and King, along with thousands of others, who championed this work before any of us thought that we should create committees or even the rare paid positions geared towards this fundamental and foundational work. So here's a poem. I Dream a World. And rather than to have me read this, I would love for you all to hear an interpretation of this poem by a very good friend of mine who set this music to text, Damian Sneed. And Justin Michael Austin is singing this recording. Some of you all may be familiar with the Will Liverman version of this. But before Will Liverman did it, this was written for Justin Michael Austin. So I'd like for us to take a listen to this great art song.
Storm
if that is of interest to you, I encourage you to go to Damien Sneed's website and to please purchase that song. Moving on, I have a few images of King. Instead of showing his iconic moments on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial or leading a bus boycott or even the final recorded video of April 3rd, 1968, you all know that one, the I've been to the mountaintop speech. Here's an image of him with his wife and his first child. This was from May of 1956. Many of you all, or all of you, know that his wife was a classically trained singer. They met when she was a voice student while doing doctoral work at Boston University. She was studying at NEC. It's not often that we see personal photos of King with his family, as we often associate him with his work as a clergyman and activist, but I like to think of him as what the great operatic baritone Robert Merrill said, a person first and an artist second. We often view him as a man who fought for others, which he did, but we seldom see him as perhaps one of the most important roles in his life as a father and a husband. This is from September of 1960 at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He became the co-pastor of the church with his father. He moved from Montgomery back to his hometown of Atlanta, and he attended Morehouse, and he enrolled at the young age of 15. This next slide, you all have probably seen this many times, from 1956, when he was arrested for his work with the Montgomery bus boycott. A year prior to that, Emmett Till was brutally murdered in the sweltering, humid summer of Mississippi. In that same year, Marian Anderson made her debut with the Metropolitan Opera, and Brown versus the Board of Education was passed by the U.S. Supreme Court. We often portray King as a heroic figure, which he was, but as Frederick Douglass, the first black person to serve as in a presidential cabinet, said, "Without struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. The fight for freedom and justice has not been a linear path. It is still ongoing, as we know. And this mugshot is a reminder that no one is above the evils of injustice and relenting racism." As I mentioned earlier, while autographing his book, Stride Toward Freedom, which talked about the complexities of the Montgomery bus boycott, we now here have an image of King after he was stabbed by what he said a demented woman at a book signing. I think it's of significance to state that the woman that stabbed him was a black woman. And now this one. This final image of him shows him holding up a sign for the Poor People's Campaign, which was scheduled for April 22nd, 1968, 18 days after he was murdered. It was a sanitation worker strike which led him to Memphis, Tennessee. He had helped to integrate buses and lunch counters in schools. However, in the final years of his life, he spoke of issues that struck a very different and dissonant chord with the people who enjoyed the consonant sounds of complacency. And now let's transition to the next section. I want to highlight a few composers gearing us back towards our black music resources here. So you all may know this man, Dr. Harrison Leslie Adams. He's best known in the art song world for his incredible song output and well-known recordings, particularly by fellow Los Angeles chapter NATS member, Dr. Gerald Taylor. A lot of his music can be purchased via his website, as well as the American Composers Alliance and the classical vocal reprints as well. Jacqueline Harrison, a dear, dear mentor and friend of mine. Actually, both of them just turned 90 last month. Dr. Adams is living in Ohio, and Professor Harrison is living in Sacramento. And her biggest claim to fame was arranging spirituals for Kathleen Battle to sing. You heard one of them actually on Friday night if you were here to hear the wonderful presentation of diverse music. She is truly a champion of vocal music, and we certainly salute and honor her always. Dr. Brittany Boykin is a friend of mine. I actually just got off the phone with her today. She is traveling to the Kennedy Center, or she's traveling to Washington, D.C., because she's having a new opera being premiered at the Kennedy Center through the Washington National Opera next weekend, actually. And I'm going to attend that because I just want to be in the mix and I want to check it out. So the title of that opera is Ocean, and you all can talk with me offline about that. I can tell you my great reviews about it after that happens, but she has some wonderful, wonderful compositions, which we'll hear a short clip of in a second. Dr. Sean O'Peblo is very, very active in the Midwest, and his song output is primarily spirituals, but he also has an opera being premiered this year called The Cookout, and that is being produced by the Vanguard Opera later this year. So a big part of what I'm trying to do is not to just show this repertoire in a way of the past, but this is living and breathing, and things are being created all the time. And so often, especially in Western music, we always look to the past, but sometimes we have to look toward the future. And so, come on, somebody. So I'm just here to help us look toward the future here as we look at our next wonderful composer, Michael Abels, who doesn't necessarily, at least from what I've researched, he doesn't necessarily have any art songs, but I had the pleasure of seeing the West Coast premiere of Omar, which was at the LA Opera. Many of you are familiar with that. And the premiere was at the Spoleto Festival last year, but they had the West Coast premiere. I'm sorry, I think Spoleto, yeah, it was technically last year because we're now in 2023. Yeah, he's probably best known for his film scoring for Get Out and Us. Yeah, so he is a wonderful, wonderful composer. Damian Jeter, you all may know him, singer, conductor. He had a lot of associations with the Portland Opera. He's no longer with Portland Opera. I think the biggest thing to know about him is that he recently wrote an African-American Requiem. Again, these are new works. So this was, I think, just written, it was just premiered last year, and there's another performance of it this year. I think it's in Washington, D.C., I believe, sometime later this year. So Damian Jeter, African-American Requiem, not to be confused with my very good friend Damian Sneed, who has done things in so many different genres. And my hope in just giving you these figures was just to say, hey, we've got people as young as 33 years old to as old as 90 that are still doing this work. So these are all of my sort of associations or how I got to this music. I started, in the Young Musicians Program at UC Berkeley, formerly known as the Young Musicians Program. Got introduced to a wonderful teacher there, the late, great David Tickner, and he gave me this song called Genius Child by Robert Owens, and I had no idea what it was. I sang it, I had no clue he was a black composer. At that point, I was 17. I honestly didn't really care very much, I just wanted to sing. But it takes people like that in your life to put things in front of you and to say, hey, this is something that you may or may not like, but I had no idea at the time that would be the start of this research. Of course, Dr. Gerald Taylor, who is a champion, he and I spent an hour yesterday just catching up and chatting, and he has thoroughly influenced me. Of course, I had the fortune of being at the hub of this music at the University of Michigan, and learned so much there. I'm going to keep going because I know we have a limited amount of time. But as I started to think about how to create this course, once I had the great opportunity to do so at SFCM, my question was, how can this be different than how I was taught? Because the way I was taught, and no shade, but the way I was taught was it was much more of a clinic or a master class. It was here's a repertoire, here are some great people in the field that are going to help coach you through this. And that's the way that it was. And it was very, very informative. But with me coming in as a new teacher at a new place and not having that experience, I said, well, how can I create a course that's, that's a real sort of a song literature class that's going to give them a little bit more information. So I thought about, rather than having it just be performance-based, what are some ways that I could help to try to create a class that would give them a little bit more of an academic side as well. So I started off with a graduate class, and it was the top of 2021. And so we were still very much in pandemic mode then, and it was all virtual, it was all online. And it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, being online. But this was the makeup roughly. So I was thinking there were only going to be voice students, but it was a mix of people. And so I welcomed that mix. So part of my challenge was I had to step outside and I had to say, okay, well, what other instrumental repertoire is available? So I was working with them, and I was consulting my own things to try to figure out what could we come up with together, particularly for the final performance, to have something meaningful. And of course, keeping in mind that with a class like this, there's no like real textbook on it. I have had some conversations with some friends about, hey, we should try to get something together, but that's more of like that's like a 10-year project. So somebody may get to it before me, and that's okay. That's okay if they do. All right, and then the semester after that, I did an undergrad class, and that one was much better. It was in person, it was fun, but still it was different in terms of there were not just singers in the class, which I thought was really great. There were some folks in the jazz department, they really, one of the main things I got from them was that when we first started talking about the spiritual, they were really, really into it. They had so many questions. I'm like, oh, I wish we had a whole semester just to talk about that. But we only had one semester to do the whole class, and it met once a week. So we did as much as we could in the short amount of time that we had. So here are some big ones. I'm just going to kind of go down the list. I know we're all familiar with these two for sure. So these are considered, and not to be sacrilegious on a Sunday, but these are like your Bibles in terms of this repertoire. So these are very, very popular. The one by Willis Patterson. Trying to think. Yeah, this is definitely a good starting place. In terms of the songs that are in here, these feature, you've got Margaret Bonds is in there, you've got the Three Dream Portraits, you've got some Adolphus Hailstork in there, there's some Dorothy Rudmore in there, but these two are generally your Bibles. This green book here, Dr. Wagner and Professor Simmons, I would like to mention, some of you all may or may not know, but these are two Caucasian women, and I love it that they are, that they put this out in 2004, and I had the pleasure of actually watching both of them perform at a African American Art Song Alliance conference a while ago. There's a great, great song that we don't have time to listen to, but I would encourage you to please check out on Consciousness Streams. It is a Jackie Hairston piece. It is absolutely fabulous and phenomenal. Actually, we might have a quick second just to listen to this. This green book here to your left is, I find it, if you're looking to program works by Black women composers, there are quite a few in here. Let's listen a bit to On Consciousness Streams.
Do you love dance charts?
And of course, not without an ad. So just to give you some context here, this is a song cycle with 3 songs. So the first one is On Consciousness Streams, the second one is Thou Alone Canst Inspire, and the third one is The Season of Remembrance. One of the songs has text by the composer herself, Jacqueline Hairston. Another one has translated text of Beethoven, and then the third one, and then another one is text of Dr. Howard Thurman. And that text was by Jacqueline Hairston. Very, very different than her spiritual writing. Moving on, there are a few others that are significant. The New Negro Spiritual, which was the New Negro Spiritual and this second anthology of art songs, were both put out by folks at the University of Michigan, of course, both compiled by Willis Patterson. The good thing about these two is that they have recordings with the anthologies. So if you're looking, to hear that, these are really, really wonderful. I would strongly suggest, though, that if you're trying to program or you're thinking about adding this into your song class, that you might want to avoid some of the second anthology art songs just because for introductory purposes, they are a little challenging. So maybe this would be for like a graduate class, because a lot of those stuff in there, you got like T.J. Anderson and Adolphus Hailstork. It's like having a music appreciation class with like only Arnold Schoenberg or something. It's gonna be a little rough. So I would encourage that only maybe for grad students. The New Negro Spiritual is really, really great. There's a really great song. I just want to show you a small clip of Soon One Morn, and I'll just keep this. I'll keep the video small here because it's not very good when you blow it up. So if you have a great soprano or a great tenor that has some improvisation skills and they are very good with rhythm, I would encourage this song for sure. Difficulties, Hailstork is really great. There's a song cycle that he has if you're looking to do programmatic work for Martin Luther King. Dr. Hailstork, who's still living, he's like in his mid-70s. He has set a lot of Martin Luther King Jr.'s text to music. And some of that music is in this anthology, so I would strongly encourage that. This anthology here is not quite well known, so if you're looking to do something that nobody else really does, I would look into Dr. Kathy Bullock's and Dr. Donna Cox's anthology here. So that's called the Performance Series, Art Songs and Spirituals by Contemporary African American Composers. The interesting thing about this is that there are a lot of quotes from the composers themselves. And the composers talk about their compositional style and they talk about the pieces themselves. So this would be a great resource. The only downside is that the print is not, the visual is not exactly quite clear. I think there was something maybe perhaps a little challenging with the printing. So if you have some vision struggles, that this one may be one to forego, but still very, very valuable. There are a couple of others. This one, of course, which I'm sure we're very familiar with, highlights specifically black women composers. And the Negro Art Song album, which is out of print, unfortunately, but it is available in some libraries. The closest library here is at the UCI library. This one is available, Rogie Clark's compilation of the Negro Art Songs. And here's a part that I felt was really helpful for me in terms of trying to pitch this, let me just be honest, in trying to pitch this to SFCM, knowing that it's a performance school, I was aware of that, but I thought, well, I still have to have some sort of an academic component-ish, I felt, in order to make this class viable. So From Spirituals to Symphonies is a wonderful text by Helen Walker Hill that talks very in-depth about like 12 black female composers. And so if you're looking in a song class to do this, you can take these two anthologies, or you could take this anthology, another anthology, and you can find readings in this book, From Spirituals to Symphonies. This is not, this is supposed to be here, sorry about that. So there are two other spirituals, two other spiritual anthologies that were important to me in doing this class. The Roland Hayes one, and Hall Johnson, of course. Hall Johnson is extremely famous and popular. Roland Hayes, not quite so much. I just found out, I was reminded a couple weeks ago that my grandfather, who is from North Carolina, my grandfather, who passed away 3 months after I was born, would actually, to make money when he was a young man, he would drive Roland Hayes around occasionally. So I found that to be a very interesting story. So I texted my mom this week as I was doing some last minute preparation. I said, hey, is it true Grandpa Noel, would drive him around from time to time? She's like, yeah, that's true. So I have a somewhat direct connection to the great Roland Hayes. And so I'm very, very proud of that. One of the great things about the Roland Hayes book is that he gives you a very detailed account of how you should perform each spiritual. And he also gives you a very thorough introduction as to the overall arc of spirituals and where he sees it fit into American culture. Hall Johnson, of course, we got into a great discussion in our undergrad class at SFCM about how he was very particular about you have to do what's on the page. Hall Johnson says in his anthology, you've got to do what's on the page. If you don't do what I wrote, then it's not correct, which is a very different way to perform the spiritual than what Jacqueline Harrison says. Jacqueline Harrison, on almost 90% of her spirituals, it says expressly, which means, and she says, I'm giving you the license to perform it the way that you feel. Hall Johnson is the direct opposite of that. He says, you must do what is on the page. And so then we got into a great conversation and said, well, is it really a spiritual if it's folk music? If it's music for the folk, how do we go from folk music to it now being sort of more, I guess it's kind of more art song-ish now? So anyway, we had great discussions about that. If you want to take this Roland Hayes anthology, you can pair it with this wonderful text that Christopher Brooks and Robert Sims put out. This was maybe about 6 or 7 years ago now. The Legacy of an American Tenor. It's a very thick book. It's about 350 pages. But it talks all about his life and his music, and it's very, very wonderful. You can also pair the Hall Johnson anthology with Eugene Simpson. He gives a very vivid description of how you should perform Hall Johnson spirituals, even down to the breath marks. And the breath marks and carrying things over, and if there's a scoop, you have to scoop up. And if you don't scoop up, then you're not doing it right. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then there are two great recordings that were released around the same time, one by the incredible, my former teacher, George Shirley, and the great Robert Sims, who's not pictured here, but there's a picture of Roland Hayes. The Christmas spirituals of Roland Hayes is a really, really great, namely the life cycle of Christ, is a very, very great exploration into as somewhat of a subgenre of spirituals if you're looking to enhance that part of your library and your teaching. Of course, Dr. Randy Jones, whom we saw earlier sing a small clip of Soon One Morn. She has put this out with NATS, of course, on the So You Want to Sing series. And one interesting part about this book is that there is a chapter on, a basic beginning chapter on art songs by Black composers. So I encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, always thinking in mind, well, how can I pair the music with the text, and how can I find text that will support the music? This Lift Every Voice, I can't remember when I found this. It was at some point in my graduate studies. But this doesn't necessarily talk about art songs, but it does give you everything up until then. So it talks much more about Black music, spirituals, ragtime, the blues, jazz, little bit of gospel. So it dances all around a lot of the music of the African diaspora. So there are 3 other texts here that, I'm going to be honest, I actually have not used these texts. And there's no shame in saying that. But when I have the chance to do this in the future, my plan is to add these 3. I'm always evolving and trying to change and figure out how can I make improvements. But a lot of what at least a Black American art song class would entail would certainly be a significant time on the Harlem Renaissance. So I would certainly encourage this text here, The New Negro. Dr. Randy Jones put out this incredible, it's sort of like a discography of all of these, concert spirituals. And so I encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, The Souls of Black Folks, Souls of Black Folk, as you know, a very dense read. But there is a great chapter on sorrow songs, which are spirituals, which I would encourage you to check out. And then perhaps the Bible, the ultimate starting place. Dr. Southern, who was the first Black female tenured professor at Harvard University, she put out this monumental work, which I think I read it took her something like 15 to 20 years to put it out. It's so dense and so detailed. And it talks about literally all aspects of Black music from the beginning, from 1619 until, the book was released in the, in the late 20th century. Moving on, there are a couple of more anthologies that you could certainly use if you're talking about Black women composers. The 44 Art Songs and Spirituals by Florence Price. If you're looking for encore songs for this repertoire, go to the Price Anthology. There are 4 really, really good encore pieces. If you feel like you've got, you want to throw something in quick and fun and lighthearted. One of them is called The Flea and the Fly. I can't remember the Fly and the Flea. I'm sorry, the name is escaping me. It's labeled as 4 encore songs, and they're fantastic. This anthology, which I'm very familiar with, it's not so much voice type specific because it allows for a range of, there are some things in here that are for soprano, some that are for baritone, some that are for tenor. So this is a great anthology this is the only anthology for Jacqueline Harrison, actually. Volume 1, I'm hoping to push her to do Volume 2. And then these two texts, the Dr. Ray Linda Brown is second to none, God rest her soul. Second to none, The Heart of a Woman is a fantastic book on the work of Florence Price. So if you're looking to go more in depth with Florence Price, you can take this anthology and take this text and make something of it. And then, of course, my feeble, very, very feeble and mediocre attempt at trying to pay Jacqueline Harrison a little bit of her credit. I've cataloged some of her works and talked a lot about her life. And so it might be worth exploring. H.T. Burley, this is a book that has been flying under the radar. Dr. Gene Snyder put this out, I think it was 2016 or so. H.T. Burley is a very monumental composer, American composer, and he's primarily known for his spirituals, as we know, but more people are becoming more interested in his art songs. And the book is kind of broken down into these 3 sections. And the 3rd section is probably the most important if you were to implement some of this into your song literature courses. She goes quite in depth with some of the musical explanations here. And then music from the last 10 years. So we've heard we've heard one of Damien's work. I want you all to hear, some of you all may have heard this already. I'm just gonna keep let me see if I can actually make this a little larger. If it won't give me an ad. Oh, and of course, there it is. All right, let's make sure the volume is up. So this is Brittany Boykin, Dr. Brittany Boykin. She set Maya Angelou text to music, and it was quite an ordeal from what I heard, trying to talk with the estate and to make sure all of that worked out. But this is a song called Tears. This is from a fantastic cycle she has called Moments in Sonder. So this is my friend Lenore Green, who's singing. This was at the African American Arts Alliance in 2017 with the composer Brittany at the piano. It's a very, very, very fantastic work. I would encourage you to check that out. It is only written for high voice, though. I've asked her about transpositions, and she has said no. I'll just put it that way. All right, spiritual sketches, we've talked about that. Let's keep going. I know we are on a limited amount of time. Sean O'Peblo, I will not play any of these excerpts, but I do encourage you, especially to look at Two Black Churches, which is, of course, it juxtaposes two monumental, or two unfortunate, rather very unfortunate situations that have happened in our history. It was premiered for baritone by Will Liverman, but actually just in October at the last African American Arts Alliance Conference, the great Bonita Hyman, who's a really great mezzo-soprano, sang this as well. So it's possible for mezzo or for baritone. And then our final slide. These two folks, I believe, are, so I met Del Shan only over Facebook, because I had the chance of singing his work How Much Longer not too long ago. But you're talking about composers, young composers, like in their late 20s, early 30s, that are really on the rise. Brittany Boykin, of course, is one. Delshawn Taylor, there's so many more. Jasmine Ariel Barnes is phenomenal. She spent time at Glimmerglass with a very good friend of mine, and I really encourage you to check her out. Jasmine Ariel Barnes her orchestral writing is phenomenal. She also has written some vocal music, but it's just second to none. And before we go, keeping with the theme of that this is a living, breathing thing, here are some recent operas that have happened and upcoming operas. So I like to not just limit things just to art song, but to more vocal music. So the Cook-Off, as I mentioned, Two Corners, Brittany Boykin is doing, there's a workshop of that actually with Finger Lakes Opera coming up in the summer rather. Ocean, as I mentioned, is happening next weekend. Omar happened recently. The Tongue and the Lash, Damien Sneed, that's an opera about James Baldwin. So if you're interested in anything James Baldwin related, I highly encourage you to reach out to Damien Sneed. I don't know if that is available for piano vocal, but I'm sure he could make it available for you. The Snowy Day, another good friend of mine, Joel Thompson, it's obviously winter themed. It was premiered at the Houston Grand Opera last year. And then Marian Song, I saw this right before the pandemic started, literally. It was a week before the pandemic. I went down with my parents and we saw Marian song, and we didn't have on masks, of course, and we were traveling, and we came back, and then the world completely changed. But I did have a chance to see it live. So, how can you live a life more like Dr. King? You program music that you don't know. You go and talk to somebody and you say, hey, I want to learn about this, or you know what? I'm tired of doing Schubert, Schumann, Brahms, and Mozart. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I'm tired of doing the same old stuff. I want to do something different. That's how I think we can live out our lives in this organization. Go ask somebody about something that you may not be familiar with. We've had a wonderful, wonderful conference this weekend that has offered various repertoire. So go and talk to Melanie Fernandez about Zarzuela. Go and talk to Jackie Wilson-Sharlock about Polish songs. Go and talk to Michael Muhammad about musical theater. Talk to some folks that you may not be familiar with, and try to take that step towards change, because I think it will make us all a better chapter, a better region, and I think it will all make us better people. So, thank you so much. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, I'll take them off to the side, because I know we have to move on. Thank you so much. Thank you.